Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts.
Welcome to Access Minnesota. Coming up later in the show, a look at the ongoing problem of segregation in Minnesota's public schools. Also, as the National Football League takes steps to make sure players are properly treated for concussions, you might just wonder how hard those hits on the field really are. A University of Minnesota physics professor has the answer. But first, January marks the one-year anniversary of the Obama administration. The president has faced significant challenges during his tenure, and at the time this broadcast is being taped, Congress is debating the administration's health care bill. Obama's aggressive first-year agenda has generated considerable opposition, and his approval ratings have declined significantly since he assumed office. Joining us is University of Minnesota political science professor Kathryn Pearson. Kathryn, welcome back to Access Minnesota.
Thank you so much.
We're 1 year into the Obama administration's tenure. He started out with some stellar approval ratings. They've declined over the last several months. Is this a pretty common practice for a president the first year in his office?
It is common for a president's approval ratings to decline after the so-called honeymoon period. But President Obama really didn't have much of a honeymoon, facing an incredible economic downturn and a very polarized Congress. So he did manage to have some very early successes with the economic stimulus package and, of course, moving all the appropriations bills through as well. And now with the debate over health care, it seems likely that he will have some legislative accomplishments. But the other thing that's going on is that the public does not like to observe the messiness of legislating. Right now, in the midst of the health care debate, the public is observing a Senate that can't get along, a House that is, where members are screaming at one another, and a president who's weighing in as well. All the while, Republicans are uniformly opposed to the legislation.
The expectations for President Obama were very, very high. Some might argue unrealistically high, given the situation that he inherited on becoming president. Do you think the expectations were in fact too high, and is that one of the reasons why there seems to be some disappointment with the progress his administration has made?
Well, I think the expectations were extraordinarily high for two reasons. And one was the campaign that he ran. He ran a very optimistic, hopeful campaign with promises to enact change. And while he has enacted change, it's been somewhat messy to watch. He also campaigned on promises of bipartisanship, perhaps promises that he might have been wise to think twice about, especially given his own time serving in the Senate. Congress is extremely polarized right now, and so it's extremely difficult to get anything through the legislative process with bipartisan support. But at the same time, with very high margins, it's the highest we've had in decades. It's, on the other hand, not that surprising that expectations were so high.
Now, the president made the passage of a national health care bill a major component of his administration. Some would say he may have pushed a little too hard, a little too soon for this. Do you think that he misunderstood how important this was to the public, and that might be reflected in some of the unhappiness with the bill that we see in some of the polling?
Well, healthcare is a very complicated issue to explain to the public. Now, he did campaign on healthcare reform, and so it was important that he bring this to the agenda early on, and he did. But in trying to learn from the mistakes of President Clinton, who came along with then First Lady Hillary Clinton to the Hill with a bill already written, President Obama said to Congress, you work it out first. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees, they went through the legislative process, and after a very unhappy August recess with many town hall meetings where people were very upset, it was then when President Obama, had a joint session of Congress and really talked about his vision for health care. And he's been much more involved ever since. But as we've seen, it takes 60 senators to agree to move a health care bill forward. And so that's resulted in many compromises that the president certainly was not talking about early on.
Obviously, there's been strong opposition to the health care bill by the Republicans, but the president has even had some difficulty with members of his own party on both the left and the right of the party. Some of the people on the left are disillusioned, for example, by the apparent loss of the public option. Do you think that the bill that eventually will likely get passed certainly will not contain the public option and maybe some other elements that were more appealing to the left side of the Democratic Party? Does the president risk losing some of his base support in the 2012 elections if they feel that he promised them something that he ultimately did not deliver?
I think Democrats do need to think about turnout both in 2010 and 2012 among the base, the people who most enthusiastically show up at the polls. But by the same token, they're also thinking about swing voters who are going to show up at the polls and need to be persuaded that when given unified control of government, that Democrats have done something. The Senate has become a 60-vote Senate. It used to be that bills were sometimes filibustered, but now, as we've seen in this session, every step of this process is being filibustered, from motions to proceed to amendments to the final package. And that means that 60 senators have to sign on. And so the result is no public option, which is making liberals unhappy. But I think that both for the party's reputation and perhaps because they feel this way, my sense is they're looking at sort of the maxim that half a loaf is better than no loaf.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at President Obama and his relations to the more liberal elements of his party. We know that he and Nancy Pelosi have not always seen eye to eye. Is the president trying to be too much of a moderate in the eyes of some of the more liberal Democrats?
I think there is some dissatisfaction from some of the most liberal Democrats, particularly Democrats in the House. On the other hand, I think that many of them also recognize how difficult it is to actually move legislation forward to have it enacted. I think where you're going to see the biggest disillusionment is, or perhaps we're seeing it, is over the issue of Afghanistan. I think that although President Obama is being completely consistent with the way in which he campaigned, I think we're really seeing some liberal Democrats who are upset and going to continue to be upset about the issue of Afghanistan.
Looking at that Afghanistan speech, what were some of the polling numbers that came as a result of that? Was the public generally satisfied with what the president told them, or did they seem to be certain elements of the public dissatisfied with that message about committing more troops to Afghanistan?
Well, if you add up the numbers of those who think that we should commit even more troops than the president wants, and those who think that we should commit some more troops, a majority of the public does seem to think that there should be more troops, yet by the same token, a sizable minority does not. And so I think this is an issue where public opinion is actually relatively soft, and it will be shaped more strongly in the weeks and months to come as we see what happens after a surge of troops in Afghanistan.
The big issue now, of course, also remains the economy. We've seen some marginal improvement, apparently. I guess the retail season, when it comes to an end, will be a pretty good barometer. But to what extent does the turnaround of the economy bode for the president's future? We know that he's done some very aggressive movements to try and stop the economy from spiraling out of control. Some of the bailout plans were extremely controversial. But if they end up working, is this the ultimate thing that voters are looking for? Is now the economy trumping virtually every other issue in terms of its relative importance on the voters' minds?
In many elections, that is the case. Not in every election. 2006 is an election in which the Iraq War, if you look at the data, seemed to trump everything else. But I think absolutely, in 2010, potentially even in 2012, it will really be about the economy. And the public will either credit Obama with thanks or blame him if things still aren't going well. And so he is doing everything he can possibly do to have a positive impact on the economy. But not everything is under his control.
When Access Minnesota returns, we'll talk with Kathryn Pearson about the upcoming 2010 midterm elections.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.
Now for today's lesson, we are going to learn how to stay healthy during flu season. Now remember, to keep those icky flu bugs away, stay home if you are feeling sick, cover your mouth if you cough or sneeze, wash your hands consistently throughout the day, and remember to get vaccinated. Do you think you can remember that?
Yes, Ms. Lee.
What was that?
Yes, Ms. Lee.
Good.
The advice may seem repetitive and, well, elementary. But this flu season, remember basic prevention. Protect yourself and others.
Can we stay for nap time?